Oh, well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. I am so psyched that you are hanging out with me today. So I'm going to start this video off with a question. When someone says no to you or sets a limit with you, how do you respond? How does it make you feel? Are you good at accepting no? Or do you feel offended? Are you pissed off? Do you feel kind of hurt? Really think about it. Because there's a lot of talk about boundaries, right? I'm always talking about boundaries. But so much of the time, what we're talking about is us setting boundaries with others. In this video, I'm going to be talking about others setting boundaries with us and how can we be really good accepting other people's boundaries, because that is the other side of the skill of being a boundary boss. So I'm going to teach you a couple of steps in today's video so that you can be more graceful and gracious at accepting other people's boundaries. So if you happen to be new here, hi, welcome. I'm Terri. If you don't know me, I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and I am the author of Boundary Boss, which you can get at boundarybossbook.com. But please, if you're new, introduce yourself in the comments, because we all love to yak around this joint, and I would love to know who you are. Also, if you haven't subscribed, please do. I wouldn't want you to miss a thing. I'm so grateful for all of the participation that we always have on this channel, so I'd like to highlight some of the comments. So today I'm highlighting a comment from Carrie. Dang, Terri. And this is for under the video that is codependency and overfunctioning. That's the name of the video. Dang, Terri, I totally related to this episode. Had to listen to it a few times so that I remember to stay on my side of the street. Right on. So before we get started, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel, hit the bell so that you can get notified every time I have a new episode. Now, let's move into today's content. All right, so boundaries are amazing, liberating. I wrote a whole friggin' book on it. That's how important and awesome they are. And as much as there's a lot of confusion around boundaries, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to set them? Why is it so hard to assert ourselves, to talk true? All of those things that I teach. There's one aspect, and I do talk about it in the book, but that really out here in the world of boundary setting, we don't talk about that much. And I actually think it is a crucial component to really being a boundary boss, which is you must be able to respect the boundaries of others. And of course, I will talk in this episode also about people misusing boundaries as a leverage tactic, a manipulation tactic. So we need to make the distinction between what is someone setting a boundary and what is someone just trying to manipulate you with their boundary. I had someone write into me and saying that they were laid up in the hospital and they were recouping at home, and one of their kids said that they would come and walk the dog for whatever the period of time was. The kid wasn't living at home. And after she did it one time, walk the dog, like for a 2-day span, and then she called her mother and said, I need to set a boundary. I need to focus on my life, so I'm not walking the dog anymore. So that's not a boundary, right? That is just someone reneging on a commitment that they made. But do you see how the language and how people can use boundaries, and maybe you do unknowingly, to manipulate others, because that's really not what they're for. Anyway, I digress. Let's move back into. All right, here's the whole thing is effective communication is incredibly important. And it goes both ways. When you are setting a boundary, of course, but also when someone is setting a boundary with you, you need that same ability to talk true so that you can fully understand what the person is talking about. Right? We're talking about listening to what the other person is saying. If it doesn't strike you as true, if you're confused, when you're really listening, then you can ask questions. Rather than, a lot of times if someone says no or sets a limit, our fear mind will have us fill in the blank with like the worst case scenario. Oh, I know they did this because I didn't go to their daughter's christening 4 years ago. Like literally, we just make things up. And a lot of it is projection and fear. You feel guilty that you didn't do that thing 4 years ago, and now you feel like it's coming back to haunt you, which it may not be at all. And even if that is the case, that's their job to have said something to you. If they were upset about you not going to their thing, that's their job to say something to you about it rather than you making assumptions. So the talking true piece is incredibly important, whether you are accepting someone else's boundaries or having a boundary conversation. Because here's the thing, it's not always about just accepting. When we're in a relationship with other humans, a lot of times it's about negotiating, compromising. And so the reason why I break down boundaries into things that fall into the categories of your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers is because obviously a preference is not as important as a deal breaker, right? A deal breaker is something that's non-negotiable. So we have to get clear. And I think that in having conversations with other people, I will always say, Vic and I will always, depending on what the thing is, if there's something that he wants me to go to or I want him to go to, we always ask, how important is this to you? And neither one is offended. He may ask me to go to something that maybe I don't really want to go to. But I will go, and I will go lovingly. If he says, I really want you to come. Amazing. And I'm not going begrudgingly. Like I'm honestly not. If he says, it's not that important, I'm just going to do a quick, if I'm talking about events, right? If we're going to an event in the city or whatever, if he says it's important to him, that's all he has to say. You know why? Because he's important to me and his happiness matters. But I also can trust him to tell me if something's not important. If it's no big deal, he'll say, nah, you know what, you can sit this one out. Don't worry about it, babe. You don't have to come. If I have a lot of work to do or something, a deadline or whatever. So anyway, point is, it's not as clean cut as just respecting other people's boundaries. But it is important that you know how to have the conversation and that let's talk about what it looks like when you're on the receiving end. And I want you to really think about these questions that I'm going to give you right now. Just let them float in your mind. And don't worry, I created a little cheat sheet for you that you can download that goes along with this episode. So, when someone says no to your request or offer, do you feel hurt, rejected, or angry? Or do you often, we can say. I mean, not always, but often. Do you get annoyed or frustrated if the advice you've given freely, if you're an auto advice giver, is ignored? Do you indirectly express your hurt or frustration with body language, like looking away or sighing heavily, or with a terse reply, such as, fine, sorry I bothered you, if someone asks to do something later or whatever, right? Really think about that. Because these are questions, and you can actually find these in the book, that will give you a snapshot of what happens for you internally when a boundary is set with you. Whether it's a boundary, a silent boundary, meaning you give someone advice and they don't take it. So they're setting a boundary by not doing what you said you thought they should do. But the other ones are more, you make an offer. Oh, hey, I want to help you. I want to make you this kind of food while you're laid up. And there'll be some people, if you say, oh, hey, you know what? Actually, meat and potatoes is not really my thing. Don't worry about it. I appreciate your effort. I would love it, though. If you want to make a few salads and drop them off, if you really want, that'd be amazing. You would literally have some people be offended. Be like, oh, look, she's getting picky. That's ridiculous. I've heard people say this in New York City about homeless folks, that if you're giving food to them, that no matter what crap you're giving them, that they should be grateful. Even if the person's like, I could be homeless, but I might still be a friggin' vegetarian, and I don't want a ham sandwich, but thanks for thinking of me. Could you get me a salad, And there's something about people having a preference that it's hard to take if you are not yet a boundary boss, or we can feel judgmental about that. And that is just someone prioritizing their own preference. And I say, bravo to that, All right, so now you've got a bit of a snapshot in your own mind of how well you accept the limits, the boundaries of others. And don't worry, if you are yes to all of those questions, that's why I'm doing this episode, because lots of people are learning to draw boundaries for themselves. But the funny thing is that, we have all of these sort of anonymous people out there that we're drawing boundaries with, always the boundary violators out there. But we're also those people in other people's lives, right? We are the boundary setter, and we're probably the boundary violator as well. And it doesn't mean it's all intentional. There's just a reality that as you learn this, you need to learn two sets of skills to a degree, or flex two psychological and emotional muscles, which is the one that lets you set healthy boundaries and talk true, and the one that allows you to not be reactive and offended and rejected every time someone sets a boundary with you. Because you just setting boundaries and then being a disaster when people want to set them with you, that's not being a boundary boss. That's really just kind of being a boundary bully, right? So we want to do both. And I think that, we hear a lot of talk out there right now about everyone setting boundaries. It's amazing. We've got to do it. Take our freedom back. And there's truth in that. There's something amazing about having a self-directed life, our own sovereignty, and that is our right. But that same right goes for other people. So when you look at, I have the Boundary Boss Bill of Rights. When we look at those things, I want you to flip them. So it's, I have the right to make mistakes, course correct, or change my mind. Other people have that right too. And if you can flip all of them, and I'll put them flipped in the downloaded guide that I made for you, so that you can sort of look at them, because they have a different meaning. And it really is a test of our boundary skills to be able to respect and accept other people's boundaries. But when you think about it, when I'm teaching you about boundaries, I'm telling you that your preferences, your desires, your limits, and your deal breakers are the things that make you amazingly you, beautifully you. That's exactly the same thing for other people. Their preferences, their desires, their limits, and their deal breakers. And it is a tall order. It is so tempting to project onto the people that we love, to think that I just did something on complementary projection, where it's like we think that other people are just like us. And it's complementary projection if you are assuming that they have the same skills that you have. And this is the same thing sort of with boundaries, where it can be painful to realize that your partner, that your friend, that your sister is sort of different from you, or doesn't want or like the same things that you want or like, or doesn't want what it is that you want to give them as like a gift, quote unquote. I was just talking about this the other day with Vic about the whole thing about surprises. You know how like people love to be surprised and surprise other people? And I gotta say, I've never been much of a surprise person, because mostly somebody surprising me is gonna get it wrong, because I like what I like. I want what I want. I don't want you to throw me a surprise party, please. I mean, Vic did once when I turned 35, and actually it was amazing, and he did a great job. But, once in a lifetime for me, that's enough. There's something almost controlling, maybe hyper-controlling about me, but also it feels like, have you ever heard of someone having a surprise engagement? I had that one time with a client. They were nowhere near the place of being together long enough to be engaged. And she really felt pressured to say yes. And I was like, Don't. That was like a trick, kind of. Don't surprise me with something important, right? Allow us, let's make that decision together. But again, those are all boundary violations in my estimation. Listen, all right, not a surprise party is not a boundary violation, but I'm just saying a surprise engagement, I believe, is a manipulation tactic. Can be, unless you've already agreed that you're getting married. Well, then sure, it's lovely, amazing, do it at the Eiffel Tower. But if it isn't that, which in my client's case it wasn't that, I was like, wow, that is shady as hell. All right, back to what are some steps that you can take, other steps? So the communication is really the first one. Make sure that you're asking questions if someone's setting a limit or is expressing a preference. Make sure you understand what the other person is saying, right? Be dialed in, be attuned to the people in your life. What are they telling you? Don't be distracted. Be a good listener. Don't be on your phone when they're telling you about their preference or setting a limit. Be the listener that you want them to be for you. Please, that is good. You have to accept what someone else is communicating, as long as what they're talking about is themselves and their side of the street. As long as the limit they're setting is a limit they have a right to set. When you are in partnership with someone, this gets complicated, right? Someone just told me about, their spouse being in a job that they really didn't like, working a million hours, a million hours a week from like 8 to 8 basically, and they have little kids, and the person also works on Sundays. And she's like, do I have a right to want him to get another job so that he's around? And I'm like, yeah. Here's the thing. You have a right to not want to be alone raising children. So how he problem solves that's got to kind of be on him, because you can't find a new job for him. But again, that's where boundaries get complicated. Because when we are connected to other folks and raising other humans with them, obviously there are a lot of things. Same thing with addiction. Does that person have a right to be an addict? They do. Do they still get the privilege of being in your life if they're an active addict? Well, that's your boundary to make. Does that make sense? Okay, so moving on. We have to accept the other person's, what they're saying, and at least be willing to listen to what they're talking about. Because here's the thing. A lot of times, stuff doesn't have to make sense to you, right? A lot of times I'm drawing boundaries and the other person may not understand. I just want you to respect it. I mean, if it's Vic, I want him to understand, or my close girlfriends, I want them to understand. But anyone else, I don't care if you understand. Just respect it. That's it. That's my job, right? I don't need to explain myself or write a dissertation on every boundary that I draw. You don't have to understand it because it's my life and my boundary. That's the same thing, though. It goes both ways. And I think we have to, the same sovereignty that we're working towards for ourselves, we have to want for the people in our life. People have a right to be self-determined. I remember when my husband first had an opportunity, like years ago, 2012 maybe, to be embedded in a war zone and do war art, it's called, basically. And I remember him telling me, like, well, I got a call about this thing, but I told them I couldn't do it. And I said, why did you tell them you couldn't do it? And he said, because we just came back from vacation and I really have to work and I don't, whatever. I said, wait a minute. Do you want to do it? And he said, oh yeah, it's like a lifelong dream. I was like, then do it. Like, don't look to me. Don't tell me, because he was like, I think I didn't make that much money last month, which wasn't even true. But I was like, what? You're assuming I'm going to be upset about it. So I said, listen, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you, if that's a dream of yours, I want you to do the dream, please. That would be my preference for you. And I would never want to stand in the way, even though, of course, it was terrifying. Did I really want him to go into an active war zone? Obviously, no. And if we had little kids at that moment in time, would I have drawn a different boundary? Probably. But we didn't. The kids were already grown. So who am I to stand in the way of what he wants to do? Even though I was scared. So about 20 minutes later, he calls me in the house. He was in the studio barn working right over there. And he was like, so I can go? I was like, yeah, you can go. And I think it was the beginning of the conflict. So it was Iraq that he was going to, not the beginning of the middle of the conflict, but it was the heat of the conflict. And I was like, why are you asking me like I'm your mother? If you want to go, yes, confer with me. It's dangerous, but it's your life. I do not own my love, just like you do not own the people in your life. And so we need to give them a certain amount of respect and autonomy, the same autonomy and respect that we want for ourselves. And for those of you who have little kids, for those of you who have a complicated situation, I'm not saying that that's always easy, but I am saying it's something that we should strive for, because we want to be free, right? Don't we want to be free? And creating boundaries and accepting the boundaries of others is what will create that liberation. So make sure that you download the worksheet that I created for you. And I also have a wait list for Boundary Bootcamp. If you want to do the course, I actually am offering it twice this year. I did it once when the book came out, and I'm doing it again in, I think, mid-September. So if you want to join the wait list, it's just terricole.com/BB2021. That is what it is. It's going to be in the show notes. So thank you for spending time with me. I super appreciate you. To be continued, and as always, take care of you.